Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Wednesday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. I saw there were at least a bunch, so there should be enough content for today. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Patreon, Adam Cameron said, in the weekly roundup, I mentioned an upgrade over the current Saroo Saturn cart. Is that a new hardware thing or firmware for the Saroo? They're close to buying one, so their statement intrigued me. This is one of those things where I opened my mouth a little bit too soon. There are a bunch of people working on a bunch of different things, but there is one thing in particular that I was interested in because while it's going to perform the same, the way it was being approached, being made, might be better for longevity. So I guess while I have to be kind of vague about this, if you are absolutely excited to get one and you really want one right now, just check the posts that the Shiro crew put up, get one from a vendor that's at least known to not sell garbage. And then when it arrives, make sure that it is beveled, make sure that everything looks okay, and then just use the proper firmware for it. If you're not in a rush at all, give it a couple more weeks and see. Maybe this thing that's coming out is going to be a better choice. Maybe it's going to be equal to, in every way, the existing options. I'm not really sure yet, but it's just one of those things that, there's always stuff moving in projects like this. So I never want to tell people wait for X or wait for Y, but this is one of those things where if you're not in a rush, just hold off for a little bit longer and see what other people have to bring to the table. But if you want to get it right now, the ones that are being sold, as long as they're properly made, then it's going to perform great exactly as you've been seeing in the videos. Next up, Shane Steinhauser said they found out that playing DVDs on their PlayStation 2 really wears out the drive due to DVDs needing to be constantly read as opposed to occasionally read with games. So what's a good non-game system device to buy new that will play DVDs and Blu-rays? They don't care if they have to use an HDMI to component converter, they just want to play DVDs on their CRTs without wearing out old consoles. So that's a great question. Generally speaking, I actually would recommend a PlayStation 2 or 3 for this exact purpose. PlayStation 2 with a set of quality component cables like the HD RetroVisions really do output a very high quality 480i signal. And in fact, Dan Mons even used that to show some of his calibration guides. So it really just kind of pushes the point home that it's a good option, but you're right, it will wear down the laser. And if you've already done a laser replacement, then you're good to go. It'll last for another 10, 20 years or something. But if not, then I understand why you wouldn't want to put a wear on it. And same with the PS3. You don't want to, I guess I could understand why you wouldn't want to use that as a player, even though it's a very good Blu-ray player and a very good DVD player as well, because then you're going to have, heat up and wear down your PlayStation 3, which, it's going to be a lot more to replace that than other things. The one thing I'll say about the PlayStation 3, though, is its downscaling is absolutely excellent. And even the Ultra HD Blu-ray player I have that I still love to this day, it's getting a little outdated, but the Oppo UDP Blu-ray player, it does not do as good of a job downscaling. So if I'm playing a 1080p video in 480p, there's a lot of sharp downscaling noise. Whereas when I do that with a PS3, it just looks excellent. There's no problems whatsoever. So those would actually be my first choices. However, that's not the question that you asked. You asked what is a good non-game system to play DVDs and Blu-rays. And I, at that point, then would look for whatever you could find the cheapest. I would find Blu-ray players that offer component video output or even composite and S video, because if you're playing on a CRT, going S video, it's not going to be a massive difference to component if you're going to 480i. If you're going to 480p, then yeah, definitely the better signal as possible. But that would be my next guess, or my next suggestion would be just the cheapest. Go to Goodwills or thrift stores, junk piles, I guess check eBay, but really any Blu-ray player that could have analog video outputs would be fine for that purpose, because then you don't have to worry about HDCP and signal stripping and buying extra equipment. And in fact, as much as I really recommend that people pick up those HDMI splitters that are PS3 compatible because they're great tools, if you don't need one, or if you're already using one of those things, you'll probably spend the same amount getting a used old beat up Blu-ray player. And if you kill it one a year because of overuse, you're out $20 or something. It's fine. $20 a year to play your movies on a CRT, I think would be totally fine. Or you could just repair it, of course. But so that would be my second choice, would be just anything with analog video outputs. However, if you're really going to get obsessive about this and you want to try to get the highest quality possible, I've always been a fan of the Oppo players because of their direct mode. So I'm going to oversimplify this, but basically people were putting in test discs and then using HDMI analyzers to see how the signal changed on the output side. And the Oppo players in their source direct mode were some of the only players on the market that didn't change anything about the signal. Even the PS3 isn't as perfect. Now, it's probably better for downscaling, et cetera, et cetera. But just saying, if you're out there looking for a really top tier solution, the BDP 93 with the ISO compatible firmware is going to be expensive, but that's going to have every analog output. It's going to do everything from 480i all the way up to 3D Blu-rays. And then I forgot the model number before that, but there was one that didn't do Blu-rays. It was only a DVD player, but same thing. It was absolutely top tier. So I think I have the whole spectrum covered here. PS2, PS3, I think is an excellent choice. If you very understandably don't want to use your game consoles, then whatever cheap player has analog outputs. And then if you want to really go to the high end level, try to find some of those older Oppo players still in really good condition. So hopefully I kind of laid all of that out, but let me know if you have any more questions. Next up, Sean said they've been messing around with a lot of devices that output HDMI, but not 1080p, such as projects that use the Tang Nano FPGA and also their PlayStation 3, to name a few. PS3 outputs 1080p, but you're probably using it in 480p mode, so let me just continue. Is there a decent low lag HDMI to HDMI upscaler that has at least a few options like scan lines and such? They know a Tink 4K will do this. They have one in their living room on the 4K TV and it looks great, but it's way too much of an overkill to buy a second one to upscale 1080p and add scan lines. And they're also looking for something a little more portable for when they're playing on their portable monitor when they travel. So all absolutely excellent questions, and you have the perspective nailed because you already got the best that's out there. So what's the next step down? And I would say the OSSC Pro would be my next choice. And then of course the Morph, but both of those are still expensive in this context. I'm not calling them expensive devices, but in the context of I've already dropped the money on the best thing out there, but what's a good secondary one? And to be honest, I mean, there's really not much else out. There's a few low latency devices. I think there's a DVDO one that works fine, but it doesn't often do much better than your TV's built-in scaling. So what I would say first, before you do anything else, is check out your monitor's settings and see if there's anything in there that can improve the image for you. Sometimes turning up the sharpness adds ringing and it's hideous and ugly and looks like an early 2000s LCD panel. Sometimes turning it up looks good, or sometimes only turning the sharpness up, 3/4 instead of all the way does a very, very good job for considering it's a feature already built into your monitor. And I would just go through and check any feature like that and just see if it makes any difference whatsoever. I've personally found that a lot of TVs do a great job with lower resolution content, and a lot of cheaper computer monitors, even very low latency ones, do a terrible job scaling stuff. So you really should try to go to as close to the native resolution as possible. So I understand all of that stuff. I just personally would start with the free option. Just take some time to mess with every setting and then kind of see where you want to go after that. And you can get small little portable scalers like the DVDO one, but it's basically the same chip that you have in most of your TVs and monitors anyway. I'm oversimplifying. There's a little more to it than that. But if I'm wrong, please somebody let me know in the comments. Next question from Sean. Have I heard anything about projects for converting RF to anything? They use a VCR right now to play the few games they really like on the Intellivision, but they'd love to eliminate the VCR from the setup. They could do a mod to the Intellivision, but they'd rather keep it stock. It was their best friends growing up, and yes, the Nintendo was better, but they played the Intellivision a lot. Yeah, those Extron and Sony devices that I showed I think I showed that in the RF video I did. And those are great. They're smaller. They're not cheap, but the Sony one at least is going to be a pretty good digital tuner. I think they do. I vaguely remember one of them doing multi-regions, if that's something that you need, but it's essentially going to do exactly what the VCR does, just smaller and maybe better quality. It's still RF video, so you're never going to make it look like native composite or S video or anything like that, but it's going to come pretty close. So yeah, those Sony boxes would definitely be what I recommended. I'll see if I can get a link to them, but if not, I definitely showed them in that RF video I recently did. which was one of the most fun videos I've done in a while. It was so ridiculous, and I just enjoyed that. So yeah, that's what I would do. But just remember, you're going to spend money to basically have exactly what you already own, the VCR. Now, if that makes the workflow for your setup better, by all means, it's worth it. But if you were looking for any kind of major upgrade, this isn't it. And now you lose the ability to play VHS tapes if that's something you even care about. Maybe not. Last question. Have I heard anything about anyone doing an ODE for the PlayStation True? Play the PS2. Crawling around the internet, you always see hints here and there, but nothing concrete. Their drive is dying and they'll have to replace it, and they do load games over the network, but they'd like to have to not depend on a NAS when they take their PS2 with me to other places. So there's talks of a lot of different ways of going about doing this, but none of it is concrete. I haven't seen a working prototype in a way that it could be manufactured. And you could always just throw in a hard drive for when you want to take games on the road, or even that SD reader. Tito did a video on that as well, if you want to check that out. So if you want today's solutions right now, getting in a SATA adapter, which is basically the same as your network adapter. So you could also use an IDE to SD card adapter, whatever, but you could basically use the hard drive built into it for that. If you're using a PS2 Slim, you're not going to have that option without a mod, but you would be able to use the SD card. So I would check Tito's video and see if that's a good temporary solution for you. I do agree that there are many reasons why an official PS2 ODE would work, or would be a great idea, and I think a lot of people would prefer it over other solutions, including even if it had network access. Streaming your ISOs from a network to an actual ODE and not using any workarounds could still up the compatibility and the performance. So I want that as well, but there are solutions right now for you. So I would check out Tito's video and that SD card solution. I'll try to remember to leave a link to that too. Next up, Brentotron wanted to follow up on their issue with getting Raspberry Pis working on certain RGB modded TVs. And they're still having trouble getting it to work on a couple of different sets. And Brentotron did confirm that they're using SCART to BNC cables. However, the BNC side is coming off of the Pi and the SCART side is going into the device. So that's definitely your problem. SCART is directional. So sync has an in and an out, so does audio. So that's absolutely not going to work in the configuration that you have. And if it does, there's some weird wiring issues with that cable, but that would definitely be the issue. So just get yourself a cable that is specifically wired for BNC to SCART. You should be able to contact any of the sellers that make them and just have them make them that direction for you. Or Retro Gaming Cables used to sell one with a switch on the side so you could change directions, but that would absolutely be it. You need BNC on the input side, SCART on the output side, and that's the only way that's going to work in any properly wired SCART equipment. So I would definitely check that out and see. I'm going to leave a link to the last place I bought the directional cables from and just message them and see if that'll be something that worked for you. But if not, any of the cable manufacturers should be able to do that. Anybody that makes one of these should be able to just wire it different. Or if you wanted, you could just rewire it yourself. If you've never soldered before, soldering cables is a giant pain in the ass. But if you have, pop the SCART side open, move the sync from pin 19 to 20, 20 to 19. I can't remember which is which. You could just look up the SCART pinout and just go from there. And then if you needed to reroute audio, that should be the same too. You just have to match up the pins for everything. But yep, either just move the sync connection over yourself or have another cable made, and it should just fix your problem. But let us know. Next up, Steven Sanders wants to know if I have any tips on a mod for Dreamcast or GameCube that allows you to load ROMs off of a micro SD card, but also retain original drive capabilities. Something that doesn't involve a super slow or jumpy micro SD situation. So for Dreamcast, no, I don't know an easy one. I think there was one mod out there that you would run an IDE cable out the back, and then you'd have your solution plugged in, just dangling in the back, and then you'd still retain the original optical drive as well. But I've only seen pictures. I've never seen that in person, and I just don't even know if that's something you could buy or you would have to make yourself. So for Dreamcast at the moment, I would just go with probably not. You could probably just be better off either getting two Dreamcasts if it's really important to you, or just using an ODE, or I guess just using CDRs if you want, but that's not always the best way to go about it. The GameCube, however, has a bunch of different solutions. And I believe the Zippy drive, I'm so sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but that latest one that was just announced a few months ago should be getting back to, or going to production soon. And that seems to be the most exciting because it is a full functional ODE that also retains original drive if you want to. So that would be the number one choice. But there's a ton of other stuff out there. Any of those mod chips like PicoBoot would do the same thing, and it would allow multi-regions on your drive. Even just using an action replay is a perfectly good solution. It's not as good as those others, but SD to SP2, so you could load the ROMs from the bottom and just boot the SD card in front with an action replay or whatever else. They're all excellent solutions. But I think the flippy drive, I gotta figure. I'll leave a link. I'm so sorry if I get that wrong, but I'll leave a link to the one I'm talking about. I think Tito did a video on that as well. So that would be my number one choice at the moment. It's not out yet, but it seems to have the most potential, with everything else being a very close second because they allow for a lot of very cool options. So sorry, there's nothing for the Dreamcast, but at the very least, you got a lot of great choices for the GameCube. Next up, Koalakoa said their company is preparing for TwitchCon, and they want to use their company laptop's HDMI output to display an image on a 9-inch Sony PVM via component video. Lag is not an issue here. Can they just use one of the cheapo converters on Amazon and go HDMI to component with BNC tips? So yes and no. I've never seen HDMI to component downscalers like that, but I have seen HDMI to composite and possibly even S-Video. So I'll double check. I'll leave a link to the experiments that I ran with Lewis from Zez Retro, but I'm pretty sure that would be more than enough for what you're doing. Presentation, video displays, have CRTs next to flat panels. I totally get it. It looks really cool. It's a neat thing to see. And if the downscaling isn't perfect and the lag is high, it doesn't matter because you're not gaming on those. It's part of the display. So I think going HDMI to S-Video is probably going to be much cheaper and easier. You could do something like get a GBS control so that you would go HDMI to then probably VGA and then go input to that, but you would then have to make sure to feed it 480p, which you should be able to do on most laptops, but still, it would be a lot more work than just using one of these HDMI to S-Video converters. So I'll leave a link to that post that we did, but please let me know if you have any other needs for this, but it just sounds like the drop in quality from component to S-Video is not at all going to be huge and not even a big deal in the scenario you're talking about, and it'll save you a ton of money and time because you could just feed it 720p or 1080p or something. But let me know if you need any more info, and I'll leave a link to what I think you should be able to use. And lastly, Dustin Mattison wanted to continue the conversation about what might be perceived as weird foods. And they said peanut butter and chili sandwiches are so normal there that it's served in all the cafeterias, hospitals, restaurants, and nursing homes. If I want to give it a try, just snag a Wendy's chili and make a peanut butter sandwich and see what happens. It doesn't sound too far-fetched. They also have an affinity for pasta mixed with chili. So it's kind of like bolognese sauce, but spicier. I get it. That sounds delicious, actually. They're not a fan of it, but it's everywhere there. There's an even stranger combination in Missouri. The spaghetti red at Fred and Red's. I've never heard of that chain restaurant. I'm assuming that's a chain restaurant. It was once on Anthony Bourdain's Travel Channel show. Basically, it's spaghetti topped with chili, and then folks top it with hamburger, dill chip pickle slices, and Parmesan cheese. Pickles sound a little different, but it still sounds good to me. Anyway, all this with the patrons letting you know that while eating this, you must be within 1 hour of a bathroom. Note, Bourdain said he couldn't even make it to the county line after eating it. That's pretty funny. I wonder if it's just their chili is really spicy and that's what sets it apart, because I've had spicy bolognese sauce before and it tastes delicious. It's basically meat sauce, right? So yeah, I don't know. That sounds good to me. Peanut butter and chili doesn't seem like something that I would really think to combine, but I'll try anything once. You know, it's foods I would eat anyway. What's the big deal about putting them together? But putting it on spaghetti sounds great. So I don't know. That's an interesting one. Thanks for sharing. Well, that's it for this week. This wasn't too long of an episode, but it still had a bunch of great questions in it, and these are always a lot of fun to do. If you want to ask a question, ask anything you would like wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A posts. The way these services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an older post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through and answering as if we were hanging out somewhere, just having a beer or a coffee or a water or something and just having a laid back chat. These questions, like today, very often only pop up on Patreon just because that's where the majority of the subscribers are. But you are all treated equally. Anywhere you subscribe, you're welcome to ask a question. It's just common to see, at the very least, more questions, and sometimes all coming from Patreon. But it's not just a Patreon thing. I love all you supporters. You're all awesome. I really appreciate you all. So thanks for participating. Thanks to everybody who just listens and enjoys these things and plays nicely in the comments. And I'll see you next week.